Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Simone here. So today I'm going to be doing my August wrap up. I had to think what month was then. And I've had a really good reading month this month. I've actually read 14 books, which I'm very impressed with myself. That's basically a book every other day, which is great. And I'm still carrying on from my booktubeathon kind of kick where I kind of got motivated to read, and I'm just really loving it, so I don't see it stopping anytime soon. But let's get started and see what books I read. So at the beginning of this month I was really into my thrillers, leading on because I read Gone Girl and Dark Places last month by Gillian Flynn. And so the first book I read this month was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, which I didn't love, I'll be honest. I gave this a 2-star. I gave both of Gillian Flynn's other books 5 stars, so I'm quite disappointed about this. This follows Camille, this follows a girl called Camille who basically is sent by her boss at the newspaper. She's a journalist, and she is sent to basically investigate the disappearance of 2 young girls in her family hometown. And in doing that she goes to stay with her family, who she hasn't spoken to in a really long time. There's some underlying things going on there, some issues. The whole town basically is under the spell of her younger stepsister or half-sister, who was 13 years old, and there's just a lot of kind of strange things going on. I really didn't like this book, I'll be honest. Like, I got to the end and the ending I didn't like. I just wasn't a fan of it. There's something about it that was just really problematic to me, and I just didn't like it, and it was just uncomfortable reading, and for some reason something in this just really didn't scream like good book, and I was upset with that because I really did love her other 2 books and I absolutely loved them. So I don't know what to say really, other than this one was not for me. And unfortunately the second thriller and the second book that I read this month I also really did not like and gave it a 1 star, and this is You by Carolyn Kepnes. Now, I have heard a lot about this book. Now, there were a lot of people saying that it was great and they loved it, and then there were a lot of people saying that basically this book is essentially about a guy who you're supposed to like but that you shouldn't. And basically this follows a guy. It's basically written in the second person, so it's written as if you are the recipient, and it's written from the perspective of a guy who is a stalker, and he's stalking this woman, and it's about him talking to this woman, and I assume he's writing it or something, but it's really creepy. It's just, I didn't feel any sympathy for him. People said that they felt really sorry for him or they started to root for him, and I definitely did not get that. I thought he was creepy and gross and I just didn't like him. It was really, no, there was a lot of kind of graphic detail that I didn't want to know about. No, it was creepy, gross, and I feel like there's a second book. I think it's Hidden Bodies, and I'm definitely not going to be reading it. I feel like I don't understand. I don't want to understand either, so no, not for me again. The third book that I read this month I actually read on my Kindle, and this was A Dark Lure. I can't say that word. A Dark Lure. Lure. The picture will be up here so you'll know what it is. And it is by Laura Than White, I believe. And I don't know where I heard about this from. I got it on my Kindle. I think it was like free or it was very cheap or something, and I picked it up. But basically this follows a woman who was the victim of a rapist, who basically hunted women and then raped them and then killed them. Now, she managed to escape from him, and so this is about 8 to 10 years later, and the guy who did it, or who was arrested for it, has basically been, I think he's been killed in prison, or he died in prison, I can't remember. Anyway, turns out, so she is now living on this like farm, ranch thing, and then things start happening which make her feel like something is happening closer to her again, and that he's around, and it's brilliant. It was really good. I did get the twist at the end, but I think that it didn't take away from the book at all. The only thing I didn't really like too much was there was a romance in it, which I don't really love a romance in a thriller book. I find that a little bit uncomfortable at times. But basically, I really liked this. I would definitely recommend, and I'd like to read more of her books because, as I said, I've never heard of her before. I just found this book on my Kindle. But I gave this book a 4 stars. The 4th book I read this month I got from the library, and I really loved this. I gave this a 5 star, and this is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. Now, this is the first Morgan Matson book I've ever read, and I've heard lots of great things about her writing, and I completely agree with all of them. I think her writing is brilliant. She really choked me up towards the end. Basically, this book is about Amy, who, her dad died in a car accident about like a couple of years before this book is set, and basically her mum has decided to move state, so they're moving across America, and so in order for that to happen, she is asking Amy to drive their car across the state to get because she needs the car, and she wants obviously her daughter to be there. Now, ever since the car accident, Amy has really not wanted to drive, so one of her mum's family friends, her son is basically going that way anyway to visit his dad, and so he offers, well, he is going to drive her basically. His name's Roger, obviously, in the title, and it's about them travelling from her house to where her mum now is, and I loved this. The part where she talks about her dad and like how she missed him and things, it really got to me. I got really emotional at one point. I don't cry really at books, and I didn't really cry, but I did get very choked up because reading it just felt so real. Now, I don't know Morgan Matson as an author personally. I don't know what sort of background she comes from, but I would be very surprised if she's not got some kind of, somebody has died in her part, like in some part of her life, because it was so realistic and so real that if that hasn't actually happened and she was writing, then she's an absolute genius. I mean, I think she's a genius anyway. I loved it, and I will be reading all of Morgan Matson books, I feel like, because I loved it so much. I thought it was really brilliant, and I'm really glad I picked it up. The next book I read this month is a very well-known book, and I've been putting reading this off because I've heard so many things talked about it, to the point where I was just like, oh, I don't think it'll live up to the hype that it gets. And I haven't seen the film for the same reason, and plus I wanted to read the book first. So I finally read it, and I'm very glad I did. And this is Divergent by Veronica Roth. Now, everybody knows what this is about. It's basically about Triss, who is a, she lives in this world where basically there's 5 factions. Okay. Yeah, so there's like the faction of truth, I can't remember what they're called, the faction of selflessness, the faction of daring, and basically at a certain time they have to pick which faction they will be part of, and it's about Triss and her pick and what happens after that and the things that happen, and I loved this. I gave this a 4 star. Again, I wasn't sure about the romance in it, which isn't fully a romance, but anyway, I'm not 100% sure about that. I think that I need to read the next one in order to sort of find that out, and I do own the next one, so I should be doing that at some point in the future. I'm not sure when yet. But I did really like this. I'm really glad I read it. I'm glad, I don't know if it lived up to the hype quite as much as I feel like it probably had, but I liked this as much as I liked the Hunger Games books, and again, I didn't feel like they lived fully up to it, so I feel like this is great. I can't wait to watch the film now, because like I said, I haven't watched the film yet, and I really liked the characters in this, and I feel like this is this will be a good one to put on the screen, so I'm really interested to watch the film and kind of compare it and see what I think. Then I read my first Stephen King of this book. I've read 2 this month, and the first one was Carrie by Stephen King. Now, I was planning on, this was meant to be my first scary book of Stephen King, and I'd already said to, I was talking to my friends about it, and I basically said that I don't think books are scary to me, because I don't particularly get emotional so much about books, really. I find it difficult to kind of get the atmosphere that you get from like a TV show. I love the books, don't get me wrong, but because I'm thinking of it myself, I don't quite have the same experience as if I'm watching it on telly and there's the music and everything like that and the atmosphere. So I'll be honest, I didn't find this particularly scary. I found it creepy and a bit weird, but I didn't find it scary. But basically this follows the character of Carrie, who is a little bit, might I say simple? I don't know if I quite mean like that. She's a little bit different from the rest of her class anyway, and basically she gets laughed at and humiliated by the people that go to school with her, and then one day at her prom something happens, and basically she has hidden telekinetic powers and she wreaks havoc. And I loved this. I really loved it. The setting and the principles in it. I gave it 4 stars, not 5, because there was something about it which I didn't think rang completely true. I know it's not a true story, obviously, but I just didn't. There was obviously something horrible had happened to her, and it was traumatic, but to the extent that she then went on to do what she did, it seemed a little bit like an overreaction, which I feel bad saying, but I kind of feel like that a little bit. Anyway, either way, I gave this 4 stars. I really did love it, and this was, I think, Stephen King's first ever novel, so I'm very interested. I'm planning on trying to go through in the kind of almost the order that he wrote them in, just because I really want to read them and see how he progresses as he goes. But I really liked this one, and that was my 4th Stephen King book I've ever read, and I'm looking forward to reading more. Then I read a very short one, and another one, I think I mentioned a couple of wrap-ups ago, that I was reading books that I read when I was a kid, and I read The Bad Beginnings by Lemony Snicket, which is the first book in a series of unfortunate events series. And I really liked this. I gave this a 3 star. Now, I mentioned back in that video that I struggle sometimes to give middle grade books more than a 3 star because they're not quite where I'm at with my reading, and I find them slightly juvenile. Not completely, but a little bit. I still love them and I think they're great, but I can't give them a 5 star or a 4 star just because I don't feel like they're quite up there. Now, that's just a personal preference myself. Again, I absolutely adored this book. I thought it was great. I've read it so many times I felt like I knew the words before I even needed to talk about it, so it was brilliant, and I definitely would recommend picking it up. I'm really looking forward. I think there's about 13 more, so I'm really interested to read the rest as well, and because I think I've read probably a maximum of about 3 or 4 of them altogether, so it'd be interesting to read the ones I haven't read and see what I think of those. The next book I've read actually shows me that I've read a lot of books by authors I've never read before this month, and this book I read was The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han, which is the first book in the Summer trilogy, I think it is, and I gave this book a 3 star. I wasn't blown away by it. It was okay. I had some issues with it. Basically, this follows a girl who has been going to this beach hut with her family and her mum's best friend's family for years, basically since she was born, and they go when she turns 13, I think, and suddenly the 2 brothers that she goes, like, that are there with her, suddenly start kind of paying attention to her because she's turned pretty, and something about this just makes me a little bit uncomfortable, like the fact that as soon as she turned 13 and went through puberty she was suddenly attractive. I did find that a little bit uncomfortable to read. I've heard a lot about Jenny Han's writing. I feel like, what's the book that everybody talks about? Oh, P.S. I Love You. I've got that. Is it P.S. I Still Love You? No, To All the Boys I Loved Before. I think P.S. I Still Love You is the second one. But I've got the first book in that series, so I'm going to give that one a go because, to be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of this series, this book. I haven't read the rest of the series. It was okay. It was kind of mediocre, though. I wouldn't say it was anything special. But like I say, I'm looking forward to reading more of her writing just to see whether it's her that's not for me or whether that's just that series that I wasn't a fan of. The next book I read was quite a big book. It's about 500 pages, and it is Daddy's Girls by Tasmina Perry. Now, again, I've never read a Tasmina Perry book before. This follows 4 sisters who are called, let me get this right, Serena, the country's most beautiful actress, Venetia, the glamorous designer, Camilla, the rising political star, and Kate, the feisty magazine editor. And they are kind of London's elite. They are followed by the paparazzi. They are kind of the big sisters. Everybody knows who they are. They're kind of like celebrity royalty. And their father is a bit of a horrible person. Each one of them has a different type of relationship with their father, but none of them are particularly great. So he's just not a very nice person. And this follows basically their father is murdered, and then all 4 of them are under suspicion. and it's kind of, it basically talks about that right at the very beginning, and then it goes back 10 months and it kind of tells the storyline up to when it happened, and then obviously you find out who did it. I didn't get who did it before it happened, didn't know that. To be honest, most of this is not even about the murder. It's very, like the last maybe, probably like this much is even about the murder itself, like, and you probably get a tiny bit at the beginning. But like the whole middle bit is just about their lives and what led up to it happening. So I really did enjoy this. I gave this a 5-star because it was really interesting. It's kind of that like seeing how the other half lives, because I mean, I'm not a rich celebrity who's got like millions of pounds and big houses and stuff, so it was really interesting to me. I can't wait to read more Tasmina Perry because I really did like this one, and yeah, I can't wait. The next one I read was actually a non-fiction book, and this was A Mother's Reckoning, Living in the Aftermath of the Columbine Tragedy by Sue Klebold. Now, I've heard about this book talked about on other people's channels before, but to be honest, I didn't know too much about it. I knew about the Columbine high school murder. Obviously, it's kind of a big thing that everybody's talked about, but I struggled with this book. I really liked it. I can't say I liked it. It was a really awkward thing to say because it's about people being killed, but basically, if you don't know what the Columbine murders were, 2 high school boys, Dylan Klebold and Eric, I can't remember his surname, they basically went into the school and tried to, they basically shot and killed a load, I think it's 12 students and a teacher, and they also injured a lot of people. And so basically this book was written by Dylan Klebold's mother, Sue, because essentially, obviously, after it happened, everybody was looking for somebody to blame, and one of the people they chose to blame was Dylan's mother, basically saying that she should have known what was going on in his head, she should have been able to stop him, she shouldn't have, like, she should have known. And this book basically talks about her experience of it from her side, and the fact that he was, this is the difficult thing for me. I struggled with this because I think it was hard for her to write a book that would still be respectful to the victims and the victims' families, without going into too much detail on what happened to them specifically. Now, I do think she did a good job of that. I also think that she obviously is very much, she still loves Dylan even though he did a horrendous thing. And you get that from this. I gave this 4 stars because I knocked a star off because basically this, I struggled with a little bit because some of it felt like she was essentially talking about how great he was and all the things that he did that were brilliant and the things that made him who he was without that side of him coming into it. So that was difficult because I did feel a little bit like she was sort of putting him up on a pedestal at times, which I don't think was justified really, but however, she is his mum, so I can understand where that came from. I will say the one thing that she talked about that really resonated with me was that when these things happen, we don't think about it being a murder-suicide, we think about the murder and then they just killed themselves afterwards. But from what she was saying, because she's seen the videos and things that they made that haven't been made public, and basically she was saying that Dylan essentially went in there to kill himself. And then he killed other people and then did that, if that makes sense. Like, that was kind of his main goal, was to kill himself. So he was very depressed and obviously suicidal. And it did make me think about the fact that there are kind of situations where we don't think about the perpetrator because we are concerned about the victims because they are the ones that these things happen to. But perhaps what we should also be looking at is how to prevent people who have those feelings from doing such horrific things. Now, I'm not an expert in any way, but that to me is something I think that should be looked at. I also think it was a horrendous thing he did, and I don't take that away from anybody, and I don't, mean disrespect to the victims or the victims' families, because I think that, they have every right to feel the way they feel. But I also think that there is potentially room for us to kind of look at it and think, well, this is how we can potentially move forward from it and stop these things from happening quite so much. Then I read another book that I read when I was a kid, and actually this one did stand up to my time. I said before that a lot of the books I'd read as a kid I was kind of reading now and thinking, oh, I don't really like this now. But I read Holes by Lewis Satcher, I don't know how you say that. And I really liked this. I gave this a 3-star. Again, this is middle grade, so it only gets 3 stars from me as a maximum. But basically this follows a boy named Stanley Yelnats who is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he goes to this place called Camp Green Lake, where essentially they have to dig 5-foot by 5-foot holes every day in the burning sun, and they are trying to find items of interest. And it's about what happens when you know, basically throughout this time. I really, really love this. I love the relationships between the boys in this. I thought it was great. I absolutely adored it, and I think that I'm glad I read this, and I will definitely be keeping my copy. I did get a copy out of the library recently, which was in one of my library halls, but I didn't get around to reading it before I had to go back. And then I bought this copy because I wanted to keep it, and I kind of want to have this for like any children I have in the future, because I feel like they'll really like this. And yeah, it's definitely one that I will carry with me for a while. Then I have my second Stephen King book of the month, and this is The Shining by Stephen King. This is one of the most well-known ones of Stephen King's. Again, I didn't find this particularly scary, but as I've explained, I don't think that I will find books particularly scary as such. It was definitely creepy, definitely made me like think. Basically this follows a young boy named Danny whose family goes to stay at a hotel that's abandoned in the winter because it's basically too cold in the sun and no one can get to it. Sorry, not sun, snow. And it's about Danny, who has the Shining, which is basically that he can see things that other people can't. He can talk to other people with the same gift without having to actually talk to them. And it follows their experience in this hotel. It's so creepy. It is creepy. I really liked this though. To be honest, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never actually seen the film. I've never read this before. Again, it's a Stephen King book that I've heard so many things about, and it's kind of one of the most iconic ones, and I'm really glad I've read it now. Again, this is one of the early ones that Stephen King wrote. So again, I'm really glad I've read this, and I will definitely be continuing with his books. Then the penultimate book I read was NYPD Red 3 by James Patterson, and this is the third one in the NYPD Red series, as the name gives away. I've read the first two either this year or last year, I can't actually remember, and I really liked them. This follows Kylie MacDonald and Zach, oh, what's his name? I can't remember his surname. And they are detectives in this kind of elite NYPD, basically, where they basically focus on high profile cases and celebrities and things. This is about this billionaire named Hunter. His driver's body is found in the river, I want to say, and they're trying to find his murder, and along the way it seems like his son has also been kidnapped, but he's not very interested in sharing any information with the police. He seems to want to do this by himself. I was very interested to read this. There is 5 in the series altogether. I've said I've read the first 2, I've now read this one, and I've got number 4, so I'm hoping to read that this month. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I love James Patterson's writing, as you all know from my book haul recently, which I'll link below, where I basically just talked about James Patterson books pretty much the whole way through. But yeah, really loved this, and looking forward to number 4. And I gave that a 3-star. And then the final book I read this month was The Reapers Are the Angels by Alden Bell, which is about a young girl named Temple who is 15 years old, and she is essentially living in a post-apocalyptic world where there are what she calls meat skins. What she calls meat skins, which are basically zombies, and this is about her trying to navigate her way through this world. I read this about 3.5 years ago, and I liked it so much I gave it to my boyfriend to read, who really enjoyed it as well. And recently he kept talking to me about it, and I was like, I can't remember what happened. So I thought, I'll reread it, then I can remember what happened. I reread this. Now originally I gave this a 4-star. I've actually given it a 3-star this time. Not because I liked it less, but because I've read so many more books since this time of reading this. I've read probably like 200 more books now, and when I read this before, I think I enjoyed it without being able to compare it to anything, and I think now, because I have read so many books, I feel like I am comparing it. Now that's not necessarily a good thing, but I am comparing it to the other books that I've read, kind of subconsciously. So I did enjoy this slightly less, only because it's not quite as good as I remembered it being anyway, let's put it that way. And I gave that, like I say, 3 stars. So that is the books that I read in the month of August. Let me know in the comments below what you've read this month and which ones of mine that you've also read. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!